Welcome to Bond and Bondage Helpline, where we untangle human emotions. No safe word required. I'm Stella Black. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for your weekly glimpse behind the curtain of human behavior. I want to start with a fact that surprises a lot of people, especially men. Over the past 20 years, study after study has shown that married men live longer than unmarried men, not just by a little bit, in many cases, by years. And here's the twist: the same data shows married women often live shorter lives than single women. Same institution. Two opposite health outcomes. Now, this isn't about men are better at marriage or women are worse at marriage. It's about what's really happening inside the day-to-day reality of a marriage, how emotional labor and caregiving flow, and the way gender roles still shape our health outcomes. And gentlemen, you need to hear this, because whether you know it or not, your wife or the woman in your life is doing a lot more for your health and longevity than you realize. And I'm not just talking about cooking dinner. I'm talking about keeping you alive. Part 1. The data. Why married men live longer. I want to start with the hard peer-reviewed facts because this isn't about my opinion. It's about what decades of careful research says. Over and over again, large-scale studies have found that men in long-term marriages live longer, healthier lives than their unmarried counterparts. And these are not small differences. In some cases, we're talking about a gap of years. First, the 7.9 million person meta-analysis. In 2018, researchers pooled together data from 7.9 million adults across 34 different countries, published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. They compared mortality rates for married, never married, divorced, and widowed people. The findings were crystal clear. Men who were married had significantly lower all-cause mortality than men in any other category. The effect was strongest for men. Married women had a small advantage over unmarried women, but nothing like the size of the men's benefit. This held true even after controlling for education level, income, age, and baseline health status. That's important because a common pushback is, well, maybe healthier men are just more likely to get married in the first place. But this study, and many others, adjusted for those factors. The marriage advantage for men still stood. Second, cardiovascular mortality studies. One of the most striking patterns is in heart disease and stroke, still the #1 killer of men in most countries. A large Finnish cohort study following over 500,000 men found that never married men had a 31% higher risk of dying from stroke compared to married men. In the United States, a Harvard School of Public Health study looked at over 127,000 adults and found that married men had a significantly lower risk of dying from coronary heart disease than their unmarried peers. Researchers believe this is partly because married men are more likely to have their blood pressure checked regularly, more likely to be on cholesterol-lowering medication if needed, and more likely to be encouraged to exercise. But that's only part of the story. There's also the emotional support factor, which we'll talk about in Part 2. Third, cancer survival data. Cancer is another area where marriage makes a measurable difference for men. A 2013 Harvard study published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology found that unmarried men diagnosed with cancer were 70% more likely to die from it than married men. That's not a small effect. That's a huge gulf in survival rates. Why? The researchers pointed to a few reasons. Married men are more likely to get diagnosed earlier because their spouse notices symptoms and pushes them to get checked. They're more likely to follow through on treatment plans. They have someone making sure they eat, sleep, and take medications, even when they're feeling discouraged or depressed. Fourth, the RAND longitudinal study. The RAND Corporation tracked a large sample of American men aged 50-70 for over 2 decades. The study found that married men outlived never married, divorced, and widowed men by several years. The benefit wasn't limited to healthy men. Even men who started the study with poor health still saw a longevity boost if they were married. This effect remained even after adjusting for income and education. This finding knocks down another common misconception that marriage only works for men if they're already in great shape. No, marriage often improves the health trajectory of men who weren't starting from a strong baseline. Fifth, cross-cultural consistency. You might think this is just a Western thing or a modern thing, but research from Japan, South Korea, Sweden, and Israel has found the same pattern. Married men have lower mortality rates than unmarried men. The difference is most pronounced in countries where gender roles are more traditional, suggesting that the caregiving and household management roles women play have a particularly large impact in those contexts. Sixth, mental health and suicide risk. The marriage effect isn't just about physical illness. Men's mental health outcomes are strongly tied to marital status. A 2020 meta-analysis in social psychiatry and psychiatric epidemiology found that divorced, widowed, and never married men had significantly higher rates of depression and suicide compared to married men. One stark example: in a large Danish registry study, never married men were 3 times more likely to die by suicide than married men. Seventh, hospitalization and recovery outcomes. A 2014 study in Circulation found that married men were more likely to survive a major heart attack and more likely to be alive 5 years later compared to unmarried men. The lead researcher put it bluntly: marriage seems to be as protective as some medications. Another study from Johns Hopkins looked at patients after major surgery and found that married men were less likely to be readmitted to the hospital because they had someone at home helping them follow discharge instructions. Eighth, the blue zone connection. In the so-called blue zones, regions of the world with unusually high concentrations of people living past 90 or even 100, strong social bonds are a key factor. And for men, a stable, long-term marriage is one of the most consistent predictors of extreme longevity. Jimmy Carter, who lived to 100, credited much of his well-being to his 77-year marriage to Rosalind. Men in the back, did you hear that? Even a U.S. president was able to admit that his life was significantly enhanced and improved by his wife. Why do you struggle with the same admission? Check your ego. It might be running amok. Researchers studying centenarians in places like Okinawa and Sardinia find that men who've had long, emotionally close marriages tend to live significantly longer than their peers. Pulling the data together. When you put all these studies side by side, the picture is incredibly consistent. The married man advantage exists across diseases, across cultures, across time. It's not just about money or social status. It's not just about good genetics. It's about having someone who actively helps you maintain your health, notice problems early, and navigate crises. And overwhelmingly, in heterosexual marriages, that someone is your wife. Part 2. Why married men live longer. We've seen the numbers. Now let's unpack why marriage gives men such a consistent health boost, and why it's not just coincidence or self-selection. Researchers generally agree there are 4 primary mechanisms, and each has strong evidence behind it. In most heterosexual marriages, the wife acts, often unconsciously, as the chief health officer of the household. She's the one booking your physical every year, reminding you to get your blood pressure checked, noticing that a mole on your shoulder has changed, asking why you're so short of breath lately, suggesting you see a doctor before that lingering cough gets worse. A 2014 health psychology study looked at over 3,000 married couples and found men's rates of preventive screenings for cancers, cholesterol, and hypertension were significantly higher when their wives were engaged in their health decisions. Men whose wives were proactive were up to 3 times more likely to get screened for prostate cancer and high cholesterol than single men. Here's the kicker. The reverse was not nearly as strong. Married women's screening rates were only modestly higher than single women's. In other words, women push men toward care much more than men push women. And this isn't just about nagging, it's about early detection. A melanoma caught in stage 1 is often curable. Caught in stage 4, the prognosis drops sharply. Wives, simply by noticing changes and prompting action, literally save lives. 2. The lifestyle stabilizer effect. Single men are statistically more likely to smoke, drink heavily, skip breakfast, eat fewer vegetables, engage in risky driving or recreational behaviors, and so much more. Married men, on average, do less of all these things, not because marriage magically makes you disciplined, but because you're living with someone who notices and cares. A 2011 British longitudinal study found that when men moved from singlehood into marriage, they cut their heavy drinking days by nearly half. A Finnish study following men for 16 years found marriage predicted a significant drop in smoking rates. And the diet data? Married men eat more fiber, more lean protein, and less processed food. Why? Because if you live with someone who's planning balanced meals, you benefit whether you notice or not. If your partner keeps soda out of the house, you drink less soda. If they suggest a walk after dinner, you're more likely to move. 3. The emotional support buffer. This one is harder to measure, but the effects are massive. Chronic loneliness and isolation are now recognized as major health risks. The U.S. Surgeon General recently called it an epidemic, linked to increased risks for heart disease, dementia, and premature death. And here's the reality. Many men have tiny emotional networks. Research from the American Journal of Men's Health shows men are less likely to confide in friends, less likely to seek therapy, and less likely to join social clubs compared to women. For many men, their spouse is their only emotional confidant. That means your wife isn't just your partner. She's your therapist, your cheerleader, your sounding board, and your crisis counselor. She's the one helping you regulate stress, framing problems so they feel solvable, and reminding you of your value when you're at your lowest. A 2010 study in psychosomatic medicine found that in older men, high marital satisfaction was associated with lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and lower blood pressure. In other words, a good marriage can literally calm your body's stress response. 4. Crisis navigation and advocacy. Imagine you're in the hospital after a heart attack. You're groggy, medicated, and trying to understand what the cardiologist is telling you about your next steps. Alone, you might nod, forget half of it, and go home unsure about the treatment plan. Now imagine your wife is there, taking notes, asking clarifying questions, making sure you get a follow-up appointment, watching to see if you're having any adverse reactions to medication. That's not a hypothetical. A 2014 Johns Hopkins study found married men were significantly less likely to be readmitted to the hospital within 30 days of major surgery because they had someone at home managing post-discharge care. In cancer treatment, this effect is even more striking. Spouses help with transportation to appointments, track side effects, manage complicated medication schedules, and advocate for second opinions. A Journal of Clinical Oncology study showed cancer patients with a spouse had a 20-30% higher adherence rate to treatment protocols. Real-world vignettes. Let me give you 2 short examples from clinical and observational work. Case 1. The silent heart attack. A man in his late 50s thought he was just a little tired from work. His wife noticed he looked pale, was sweating more than usual, and seemed short of breath. She insisted on urgent care. Within an hour, he was in surgery for a blocked coronary artery. The cardiologist told him he would likely have died that night if he hadn't come in. Case 2. The missed appointment. Another man, living alone, developed a persistent cough. He delayed seeing a doctor for months. It was just allergies, he thought. By the time he was diagnosed, it was stage 4 lung cancer. In follow-up interviews, he admitted, "If I'd been married, I think someone would have noticed sooner." No shite, Sherlock. The pattern behind the patterns. When you line up all these findings, one thing becomes clear. Married men live longer because they have a built-in safety net for health. That net is woven from vigilance, lifestyle nudging, emotional buffering, and practical advocacy. And overwhelmingly in heterosexual marriages, that net is built and maintained by the wife. This isn't to say men never contribute to their wives' health. They do. But study after study shows the effect is far stronger in the husband's direction, which brings us to a harder truth we'll cover in Part 3: why married women don't see the same health gains. Part 3: why married women often live shorter than single women. We've established that marriage is a health boon for men. But for women, the data tell a much more complicated and often sobering story. Several large-scale studies show that married women do not enjoy the same longevity boost men do. In fact, in some countries, married women have slightly shorter lifespans than their single counterparts. This isn't because women are inherently worse at marriage. It's because of how marriage, as it's still structured in most heterosexual relationships, loads disproportionate health and caregiving burdens onto women. 1. Caregiving stress and the wellness tax. When a male spouse falls ill, it's usually the wife who becomes the primary caregiver, and women's caregiving often looks very different from men's caregiving. A 2016 U.S. national study of caregiving found that wives provide more hours of care than husbands do for ill spouses. Wives are more likely to handle complex medical tasks, like wound care, injections, or managing oxygen therapy. Wives are more likely to provide care alone without outsourcing to paid caregivers or extended family. This always-on caregiving role means women often experience higher levels of chronic stress than their male counterparts. Chronic stress, in turn, is linked to increased systemic inflammation, higher blood pressure, greater risk of heart disease, impaired immune function, shorter telomere length, a biological marker of accelerated aging. One journal of the American Heart Association study even found that women providing high-intensity spousal care had a significantly higher risk of heart attack themselves over the next 4 years. 2. The double shift, paid work, plus unpaid labor. The second shift, a term coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild, describes how women who work outside the home still do the majority of housework and childcare after their paid job ends. Recent time-use studies show this hasn't gone away. In the U.S., women still perform about 65% of household labor. In households with kids, women average 2-3 hours more domestic work per day than men, even when both partners work full-time. That means less time for sleep, exercise, and self-care. Over time, this constant time deficit takes a toll on physical and mental health. 3. The mental load. Beyond the visible chores, there's the mental load, the planning, anticipating, and organizing that keeps a household running. Examples: remembering everyone's birthdays, knowing when the kids' vaccinations are due, keeping track of school forms, anticipating what groceries are running low, scheduling the plumber before the leak becomes a flood, and so much more. A 2025 Italian study on mental load found that even in dual-income households, women reported far more emotional fatigue and stress spillover from home into their paid work than men did. The mental load isn't just tiring, it's depleting, leaving fewer psychological resources for women's own health needs. 4. Reduced autonomy and self-care time. Single women have full control over their daily routines. They decide when to exercise, what to eat, when to go to bed. Married women, especially mothers, often lose much of that autonomy. Their schedules are tied to their partners and their children's needs. Meals get planned around other people's preferences. Sleep gets interrupted. Exercise gets postponed. A nurse's health study analysis found that married mothers were significantly less likely to maintain regular exercise compared to single women, and were more likely to gain excess weight over time. The marital quality factor. Marriage is not automatically good for health, especially for women. The protective effect only appears in high-quality marriages. A 2005 study in health psychology found that women in low-quality marriages, high conflict, low support, had higher blood pressure, higher BMI, worse immune response, and more depressive symptoms. The effect was strong enough that, for women, a bad marriage was worse for health than being single. 6. Cultural expectations and role entrapment. In many cultures, women are still socialized to be the default caregivers and emotional managers in marriage. Even when they're exhausted or ill themselves, they feel pressure to keep giving. This role entrapment means women may delay their own medical care to focus on their spouses, downplay symptoms to avoid burdening the family, accept stress and exhaustion as just part of their role, and more. Over decades, these patterns accumulate and can shave years off life expectancy. 7. Case vignettes. Maria, 62, retired early to care for her husband with Parkinson's, manages his medications, physical therapy, and all household tasks. Hasn't had her own mammogram in 3 years because she has no time. Suffers from chronic back pain and high blood pressure. Allie, 48, works full-time and manages all cooking, cleaning, and scheduling for her family. Sleeps 5 to 6 hours a night. Skips exercise. Was recently diagnosed with pre-diabetes. She says, "I know I need to take care of myself, but there's no space for me in the day." 8. The wellness tax in numbers. When researchers quantify this imbalance, it's sobering. Married men gain 5 to 7 years of life expectancy compared to single men. Married women gain 0.1 years, and in some studies, lose up to 2 years compared to single women. The health gap widens in traditional marriages with clear gendered role division. In more egalitarian marriages, women's health outcomes improve. Marriage is not inherently bad for women. The problem is the way many marriages are still structured. Men receive sustained, structured health benefits from their wives' labor. Women often pay for that with their own health, the wellness tax. That's why, when manosphere voices claim women are useless to men, the science says the opposite. Women are often the reason men live longer. The tragedy is that women often shorten their own lives in the process. Part 4. Manosphere Myths versus Reality. We've looked at the research, and we've seen the numbers. Marriage is often life-extending for men, and women are usually the reason. But if you spend even a few minutes in the manosphere, podcasts, YouTube, or certain corners of Reddit, you'll hear a very different story. The narrative often goes like this. Women bring nothing of value to men's lives. Men are the providers, and that's all that matters. Marriage is a scam designed to benefit women only. Men's role is to earn money. Women's role is to spend it. These myths are persistent, emotionally appealing to some men, and completely disconnected from decades of solid research. Let's take them one by one. Myth 1. Women are useless to men. Reality. Women are often the single biggest factor in why married men live longer than single men. The studies we covered earlier show married men have lower mortality rates across nearly every major cause of death. These benefits remain even when controlling for income, education, and baseline health. The difference is most pronounced in traditional heterosexual marriages where the wife is the primary caregiver and household manager. If women were truly useless, this gap wouldn't exist. Men wouldn't be living longer because of them, but they do, by years. Myth 2. The paycheck is what counts. If I earn the money, I've done my part. Reality. A paycheck can't schedule your colonoscopy. It can't notice your mole is changing color. It can't take your blood pressure at home and notice it's creeping up. The longevity benefit of marriage for men persists even when researchers control for wealth and income. In other words, a high-earning single man still dies earlier on average than a lower-earning married man. Men in the back of the class, did you hear that? Let me repeat. A high-earning single man still dies earlier on average than a lower-earning married man. The health advantage is about human care, not just financial provision. And here's the kicker. When men insist their role stops at bringing home the bacon, they often sentence their wives to a shortened lifespan because they're refusing to share in the health protective work. Myth 3. Men don't need emotional support. Reality. Social isolation is one of the most powerful predictors of early death, and men are far more likely than women to be socially isolated without a spouse. Research shows many men list their wife as their only confidant. Without a spouse, men are less likely to seek therapy, less likely to talk about feelings, and less likely to get help when depressed. Married men have lower rates of suicide, and the difference is not explained by income or education. In Denmark, a national registry study found never married men were 3 times more likely to die by suicide than married men, 3 times. If you think you don't need emotional support, you might be alive right now precisely because you're already getting it. Myth 4. Marriage only benefits women. Reality. If we're talking about physical health and longevity, marriage benefits men far more than women. On average, married men gain 5 to 7 years of life expectancy over single men. Married women gain 0–1 years and sometimes lose years compared to single women. This is because in most marriages, women are doing the health protective labor, not receiving it. In other words, men are the primary beneficiaries of the health boost marriage offers. Myth 5. Women are a drain on resources. Reality. Women are more likely to generate resources that can't be measured in dollars, but directly translate into years of your life. These include managing your medical appointments, cooking balanced meals, reminding you to take medication, helping you recover after surgery, driving you to the ER when you say, "I'm fine, but you're not." These contributions don't show up on a paycheck, but they show up in your medical chart, your survival odds, and your extra years alive. Myth 6. A high-status man doesn't need a wife for health. He can just hire help. Reality. Paid help can do tasks, but they can't replicate the intimacy and vigilance of a committed partner. Your personal assistant might remind you of an appointment. Your housekeeper might prepare a healthy meal. But none of them are lying next to you at night, hearing you cough differently than usual. None of them notice your mood shift over 3 days and connect it to physical symptoms. The protective health effect of marriage isn't just about tasks. It's about continuous relational attention, and that's something you can't outsource. If we zoom out historically, human survival has always depended on cooperative partnership. In hunter-gatherer societies, survival wasn't about a man going off to hunt alone. It was about mutual provisioning, men bringing meat, women gathering plant foods, both caring for children and elders. Anthropologists studying modern foraging groups like the Hadza find that men's foraging returns are higher when they have a stable partner, because their partner supports them in countless small, invisible ways. The manosphere idea of a self-sufficient lone wolf male is a romantic fantasy that doesn't exist in human evolutionary history. When we strip away the myths and look at the evidence, women in heterosexual marriages are often men's most important health asset. Men get measurable, life-extending benefits from their wives' labor, care, and advocacy. Women often pay for that with their own health, especially when the marriage is structured so men feel entitled to care but do not reciprocate it. So if a man truly believes women bring nothing to the table, he's ignoring the fact that the table itself, his very survival, is often being held up by her work. So let's step away from percentages and hazard ratios for a moment and talk about what this actually looks like in real life, because when you see it up close, it's impossible to deny the pattern. Case 1. The silent heart attack. David, 59, was convinced he was just run down from work. He'd been feeling a little breathless, breaking into a light sweat when walking upstairs, but brushed it off. His wife, Elaine, noticed his skin looked pale and slightly clammy. She insisted they go to urgent care. Within an hour, David was in an ambulance headed for emergency surgery to clear a 99% blockage in one of his coronary arteries. The cardiologist told him bluntly, "If she hadn't brought you in tonight, you probably wouldn't be here tomorrow morning." Case 2. The mole. Randy had a mole on his shoulder he'd ignored for months. His wife pointed out that it looked darker and more irregular than before. She made the dermatologist appointment herself. Biopsy came back. Melanoma, caught early enough to be removed completely. Without her intervention, it could have progressed to stage 4 skin cancer within a couple of years. Case 3. Post-surgery recovery. James underwent knee replacement surgery at 67. His wife, Marcia, stayed on top of his pain medication schedule, encouraged him to do his physical therapy exercises, and drove him to every appointment. A friend from his bowling league had the same surgery around the same time but lived alone. That friend skipped therapy sessions, didn't ice his knee consistently, and ended up with limited mobility and chronic pain. Same operation, same surgeon, two completely different recoveries, largely because one had a live-in health advocate. Case 4. Depression after layoff. Peter lost his job at 52. For weeks, he withdrew from friends and stopped going to the gym. His wife noticed the mood change, encouraged him to see his doctor, and even sat with him while he called a therapist. That early intervention prevented a full depressive spiral. Compare that to what we know from research. Men without a partner are far less likely to seek help and far more likely to turn to alcohol or isolate themselves until the depression becomes severe. Case 5. The Diabetes Wake-Up Call. Luis was diagnosed with prediabetes at 45. His wife overhauled their household diet, more vegetables, less processed sugar, healthier snacks in the pantry. She suggested they start walking together after dinner. 6 months later, Luis's A1C was back in the normal range. No medication needed. In clinical work, I've seen this exact dynamic dozens of times. Without that sustained household change, most men do not reverse early-stage diabetes on their own. Case 6. High blood pressure at home. Mark had never considered buying a home blood pressure cuff. His wife did, and began taking readings once a week. Over time, she noticed a gradual upward trend. Mark saw his doctor, was diagnosed with hypertension, and began treatment before he ever experienced symptoms. Untreated, high blood pressure silently damages the heart, kidneys, and brain for years before the first heart attack or stroke. Case 7. The Sudden Fall. Tom, 78, tripped on a rug and hit his head. His wife insisted on going to the ER even though Tom said he was fine. CT scan revealed a slow brain bleed. Because it was caught early, surgeons drained it before it caused permanent damage. A man living alone might have gone to bed, assuming he was just sore, and never woken up. Case 8. The Widower Comparison. Research consistently shows widowed men experience a sharp spike in mortality in the first year after their wife dies. I'll give you one example. Paul lost his wife to cancer. In the first year after her passing, he lost weight unintentionally, skipped annual screenings, and began drinking heavily. His adult children described him as adrift. This pattern is so common it has a name in gerontology, the widower effect, and it underscores just how dependent many men's health behaviors are on having a spouse in the home. Why these stories matter. Every one of these examples illustrates the same truth. The difference between catching a disease early and catching it too late often comes down to having someone who's watching, noticing, and acting on changes. In heterosexual marriages, that someone is overwhelmingly the wife. These aren't luxuries, they're survival factors. If the manosphere narrative were true, if women brought nothing to men's lives, these stories wouldn't be so common. But they are. And for every one of these, there are hundreds more quietly happening every day, without fanfare, without showing up in the bank account, but showing up in the extra years a man gets to live. The invisible work of health advocacy. What makes these examples so powerful is that they're invisible to most men while they're happening. You don't see the years you didn't lose to an undiagnosed condition. You don't feel the heart attack that didn't happen. You don't remember the cancer that was treated before it could spread. This is the paradox. The better a woman is at quietly keeping you alive, the more likely you are to take her for granted. Part 6. What Men Can Do. Sharing the Health Work. By now the research is clear. Married men live longer largely because of the active, ongoing, and often invisible work their wives do to protect their health. Married women often don't get the same benefit because they're doing that work for you, often at the expense of themselves. If you're a man who values fairness, if you want your marriage to be strong, and if you actually want your wife to be around for the long haul, you have to learn to share this load. 1. Recognize the work you don't see. The first step is admitting this work exists. Health protective labor isn't just cooking dinner, making a doctor's appointment, reminding me to take my meds. It's also tracking subtle changes in your mood and energy, monitoring symptoms over time, reading between the lines when you say, I'm fine, but she can tell you're not, being the one who stays alert during medical appointments so nothing is missed. Start by saying it out loud. I see how much you've been looking out for my health, and I appreciate it. Recognition is not enough, but it's where respect begins. 2. Take ownership of your own preventive care. One of the simplest, most concrete ways to share the load is to be proactive about your own medical care. That means scheduling your own annual physical without being told, knowing when your next dental cleaning is due, tracking your cholesterol, blood pressure, and A1C results over time, keeping a list of medications you take, why you take them, and when they need refills. A 2019 Mayo Clinic proceeding study found that men who kept track of their own medical appointments were significantly more likely to maintain consistent preventive care, and their partners reported less stress around health management. 3. Build your own emotional support network. If your wife is your only confidant, you are setting both of you up for trouble. Why? Because it turns her into your sole therapist, crisis manager, and cheerleader 24/7. That is emotionally exhausting and leaves her with less energy for herself. Instead, maintain friendships with at least 2 to 3 trusted people you can be real with. Stay connected with siblings or cousins you trust. Join a men's group, sports team, or community activity where you actually talk about life, not just stats and scores. This isn't soft, it's survival. Research from perspectives on psychological science shows strong social networks outside of marriage are as protective for health as quitting smoking. 4. Learn the invisible skills. A lot of health protective labor is skill-based. Learn it. Meal planning. How to put together balanced, heart-healthy meals. Symptom tracking. How to keep a log of ongoing symptoms or side effects to report to the doctor. Medical navigation. How to read after visit summaries, follow up with insurance, schedule specialists. These are not women's skills, they are human survival skills. When you know how to do them, you reduce the health burden on your wife, and you're more capable if you're ever on your own. 5. Step up when she's the patient. Here's a hard truth. Many women report that when they get sick, their male partners step in for a few days, but often drop off quickly. If your wife is the one who's ill, take over household duties without her having to tell you each step. Go to her medical appointments. Track her medications, symptoms, and follow-up needs. Check in daily on how she's feeling physically and emotionally. Treat her recovery with the same seriousness you would want her to treat yours. 6. Share the mental load. If you only take on tasks after being asked, you're not truly sharing the work. Sharing means anticipating needs before they become urgent, remembering deadlines without reminders, managing half the long-term planning for health, home, and family, and so much more. One strategy I've seen work well in couples therapy: each partner takes full ownership of certain health domains. Example: one partner handles all dental scheduling and follow-ups. The other handles all vision care and annual physical scheduling. Both keep each other informed of results. This prevents the default, she manages everything unless she delegates it. 7. Think in lifespan terms. Your wife's health is your health. If you burn her out with one-sided caregiving, you increase the risk she'll face chronic illness, depression, or burnout, and then your health safety net is gone. Conversely, if you share the health protective work now, she's healthier and happier. You have a stronger, more balanced marriage. You both increase your odds of living longer, better lives together. 8. Replace entitlement with gratitude. Drop the idea that providing financially is enough. Drop the idea that her care is automatic or owed. Start with this: I'm grateful for how much you've kept me alive and healthy. I want to make sure I'm doing the same for you. A study in personal relationships found couples who regularly expressed gratitude to each other had better physical health outcomes over time, likely because gratitude fosters reciprocity and mutual investment. 9. Small changes, big payoffs. You don't have to overhaul your life overnight, but you can start today by putting your own medical appointments on the calendar, asking your wife what health tasks she handles for you, and taking two of them over, building one intentional connection with a friend each week, doing one proactive health action for her without being asked. Drop the idea that her care is automatic or owed. The manosphere will tell you a wife is a liability, a drain, or a threat to your independence. The research, and frankly, your own medical history if you look closely, will tell you she's often the reason you're still breathing. If you want a marriage that benefits both of you, start valuing the health protective work as much as the paycheck. And start doing your share of it. Because the real measure of a man isn't just how long he lives, it's how well he helps the people he loves live longer, too. That's enough for now. Your scars might be on the inside, but scar patches come in all shapes and sizes. Find your patch and protect them with your life. See you soon.